I think one of the reasons why I really started to love the R31 GTS-R, especially probably around the Gran Turismo 6 kind of days, so around a decade or so ago, is because it really started to feel to me like a pivot point between what the Skyline was and what the Skyline became. Of course, there was always a motorsport connection for the Skyline. That was one of the most intrinsic parts of why it was such a popular car in its performance forms. But after this point, the top tier versions were synonymous with four-wheel drive. Before this point, not so much. And this one feels like the last dregs of that idea to me. And of course you can get GTS-Ts, etc., but they're not special in the same way that this one is. And of course with that direct motorsport connection, the fact it still has those super retro boxy looks, the snowplow ride height with the lower front end, the raised back, that built-in super boxy spoiler and the big, iconic, instantly recognisable chin splitter, and of course those big quad rear lights which were carried over after this point. Being rear-wheel drive, it's lighter, it's more basic, it's not quite as powerful, about 207 horses stock. You can get quite a bit more than that out of it even without a motor swap. The weight is good, 1340 kilos. Of course not having four-wheel drive certainly helps with that. The point level is quite reasonable as well, even for a machine which has at least on par with hot hatch numbers, even by early 2000s standards. And for a 1987 car, JDM or not, it's very competitive. In terms of pricing, I love the fact that it's appropriately expensive. 176,000, I have no issue with that price whatsoever. This definitely feels like one of the most collectible Skylines. At the same time, it's way more modest than something like the R32 Nismo, which is like 400 grand. Again, you know, it's befitting of its price for other reasons, but 176 grand, you know, you don't even blink at that price. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll buy it. I'll buy a couple maybe. The visual upgrades are pretty cool for it as well. They do change depending on if you fit the wide body or not. I do really enjoy it when they have wide bodies in the game, especially on classics, which is where they do tend to do this, where it's more of a bolt-on, very discreet arch kit, so it just makes the track width wider, but not the rest of the body. I really do love that look. You can do the same thing in Forza Horizon 5 as well, and to me, it looks perfect on the car. It's one of those cars where the rest of the proportions already look really good, but it's a little narrow, and bringing them out a bit more with those extended arches, it just suits the car so much, like a touring car and a rally car to me at the same time, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I love this as well, because I have a lot of love for the Nissan 240 RS. It's by far the Silvia that I love the most. It's such an undervalued car, in my opinion, beyond, you know, stuff like your Quattros and Deltas. It's not talked about anywhere near as much, but it's such a cool car, and this has some similar kind of styling cues. And then the point level being below 450 stock, that's quite good. It means you could potentially use it for at least classic events, if not some modern stuff as well, and although it's fairly expensive for something with a low point level, it's a classic. Of course, like I alluded to, the key difference between what you're expecting from a Skyline, if you're maybe a younger fan or who's just not familiar with the different generations of Skyline, the biggest difference will be rear-wheel drive. That is wildly different to what you're expecting from a Skyline from the R33, 4, etc. This one though suits that down to a T. And honestly, I really do love it having that. It means that it can be a great drift car, it can be a great track car, and even though all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive gives you that immediate gratification of having instant grip, it's a lot more forgiving, perfect for beginners. At the same time, if you can train yourself to use a rear-wheel drive car, even if it's not necessarily even a difficult one, it will 9 times out of 10 be more rewarding in the long run. Four-wheel drive is great for that initial gratification, but the limitations of what four-wheel drive can do tend to arrive sooner than what rear-wheel drive can do. This is kind of an example of that gift that keeps on giving, because even though I would never say this is a difficult car to drive by any stretch, regardless of the power level or the tyres, it is definitely a car that doesn't help you as much as an all-wheel drive later model. It doesn't feel like it's doing all the work for you like some of those do, and I like that. It feels decidedly old school, but also it feels advanced for its time in a very Japanese kind of way. To me, this is definitely one of the standouts for me so far this year. From updates, it's a car which I've liked for quite a while. It's great to have it back. I do of course love the fact that it's a premium for the first time ever. It was a non-premium before, and much like the Volvo, having those great visual upgrades makes a massive difference as well. It's such a good looking car with those JDM style mods, or track day mods depending on how you want to set it up. And in the long run, well, we already know this is going to get an engine swap, it's just a matter of when. Of course, it's going to probably something like a GTR Nismo. I could see them maybe giving it like an R32 Nismo engine perhaps, but I wouldn't be surprised if it gets an R35 engine somewhere down the line. That could change things though. If it's got 1,000 horsepower going through the rear wheels, it might not be quite as forgiving then, but it's a pretty great car. I think this is more of a beginner's Skyline, you could say, by today's standards, because of having so much less power, but it's a very rewarding one. It's a lot of fun to drive. The looks won't be for everyone because it does look very retro by today's standards, but I personally love the way these things look, and I actually was looking into buying, not of course a GTS-R, but this kind of era of Skyline relatively recently. I saw a beautiful one for sale. It was the 4-door saloon version, and I didn't get it, of course, but they are fantastic looking cars in my opinion. I really love these boxy generations of the R30 and the R31. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down below if you're happy to see the car back, and especially if you've never used a car like this before. Maybe if you're only used to 32s, 33s, 34s and GTRs. I'd be fascinated to know what you think of this one, because it's definitely very different to the Skylines that we usually think of when you hear that name. We still have a couple more cars left to talk about, so stick around for those as well. And for now, thanks for watching.